Well, hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Shingo Principles podcast and the Shingo webinar series. And I'm Mary Price. I'm the Events and Marketing Director at the Shingo Institute. For those of you that may be new to the Institute, we are a program within the John M. Huntsman School of Business at Utah State University. And we help leaders and organizations around the world strengthen their cultures by understanding the principles of organizational excellence and identifying ideal behaviors that bring those principles to life through effective systems. And if this is your first time joining us, welcome. We hope that you find meaningful ideas and practical insights in the conversations that we share each month with our special guests. We also invite you to visit our website, shingo.org, to learn more about the Shingo Institute and the resources available to support you on your continuous improvement journey. Today, we're especially excited to welcome Steve Spear, author and senior lecturer at the MIT Sloan School of Management. Many of you know Steve from his highly regarded book, The High Velocity Edge. Today, however, we'll be talking about his newest book, Wiring the Winning Organization, which recently received the Shingo Publication Award. Steve, we're so delighted to have you with us. I'll turn over the time to you for just a minute to give a quick introduction.
Yeah, hey Mary, thanks so much. So I really appreciate this. My relationship with Shingo is a long and rich one for me. Aside from the fact that you all have helped draw attention to some of the work I've done going back to the 1999 article I had in Harvard Business Review, decoding the DNA of the Toyota production system. But even more than that, then because of that attention, to have conversation and collaboration with members of this community, which is really interested in advancing the frontier of what's possible. And I'll just, in terms of self-introduction, I'll just say that it links very directly to what's motivated my work over several decades now, which is trying to understand the sources and then how to replicate the gap. I mean, most people who are trying to create and then deliver value into society, and this is across sectors, right? It doesn't matter. It could be manufacturing where the interest was first directed, but tech, high tech, biotech, pharma, healthcare delivery, government services, military institutions, defense contractors. It just simply doesn't matter. There's this gap between what on any given day people are actually able to do in terms of generating and delivering value and what is possible, not even hypothetical, theoretical, but what's demonstrated possible. And then there's those few who, for them, the gap is much more narrow. What they actually do versus what's possible is much closer and tighter. And not only that, they're always advancing the frontier. So the folks who are back here already looking at the gap, it's not even static source of frustration. It's a dynamic source of frustration because they have this gap which they're trying to close, and then every time they try to close it, it keeps widening on them again. And so, in terms of the work I've done, is really focusing on leaders and leadership and what do leaders do to close the gap and then be on the front end, you know, accelerating the movement of the frontier always outward.
Right, great. Thank you so much for that. So we do have a few questions. We're just going to go ahead and do a quick Q&A here, and we'll get started with the first one. So, Steve, tell me, so what are the limits of wiring the winning organization framework, even when slowification, simplification, and amplification are applied well?
Yeah. So fundamentally, here's what we're looking at, and I'll lapse a little bit. One, because I got an MIT background, so that happens. But also, the analogies are very strong. That we have quote unquote systems, and in the case of technical systems, we think about all the nodes in which there's a transformation of something, whether it's a material, information, data, etc. Else. In enterprise, we have this distributed enterprise where the points of conversion are people, right? That people have their tasks, they have their jobs, and the reason we ask people to do certain things is because there's a before condition which they convert through their own ingenuity, through their expertise, through their skill, their creativity, their passion, their interest. They take something from a before condition into an after condition, and hopefully that after condition is of more value than the before condition was to somebody else who's appreciative. And that's it, right? And you start thinking about that, that's what people do. They take before conditions, convert them into better, more valuable after conditions. And the reason we have organizations in the first place, why we don't do this just one by one on ourselves, is that a lot of the conditions we have to transform are far greater, and the challenge is far greater than that of one individual. Though that we have to, by the sheer amount of work and expertise and functionality required, that just to characterize a situation, understand it, express what problems have to be solved, and then solve them. There's an enormous amount of collaborative, cross-functional problem solving that has to occur. And then when we even have solutions that are somehow conceived, then there's an enormous amount of cross-functional coordination that's required to bring those solutions into practice. So that's our starting point, right? Which is we have a lot of people, all of whom are necessary, and each one of them has some capacity to change before into after. So then we get into the question, then how do we succeed? Which is we have a choice. And in wiring the winning organization, we talk about putting ourselves in a problem-solving danger zone versus a problem-solving winning zone. And the danger zone is characterized by the set of characteristics that make it hard for us to collaborate in solving hard problems, and make it difficult to coordinate in delivering solutions. And the winning zone is the opposite, right? It's the conditions in which it's much easier to collaborate in the problem solving, much easier to coordinate in the delivery of solutions. So anyway, that's the setup, right? Which is, why do we have enterprises? Because we need all these different pieces of expertise. Not only that, why do we have organizations? Because we have to have collaboration and coordination to create and deliver value. And we want to be out of the winning zone and out of the danger zone, and we want to be in the winning zone. All right, boom. So anyway, what's the sprawl here is that in any system, we know we have problems when we concentrate data, when we concentrate data processing, problem solving, when we concentrate decision rights, and this is true for any system, technological or sociological organizations, which is once we start doing that concentration, what happens? One, latency. That the situation which we discovered way out here, quote unquote, on the operating edge, by the time awareness of that situation gets to the center of the organization, from the operating edge to headquarters, and then to the senior levels, where we finally have a point of cross-functional integration, there's time loss, latency. Then we have a second loss, which is what we call clarity or observability, which is, something which, if you have a problem, you're aware of the nuance, the subtlety, the idiosyncrasies of the time and place. By the time it makes it to the center and the top, it's just that there was a problem that Mary had. What are the details? It's lost already. So latency, loss of observability. The other thing, when we bring all of that data, decision making, decision rights, to the top and the center, there's a loss of autonomy. That you're no longer in a situation to act independently based on what you're seeing. With the loss of autonomy is the loss of ability to solve problems in parallel. Because when you lose autonomy, so do all the other people. It's not like we take it from some. And so anyway, we put ourselves at a severe set of disadvantages, because what ends up happening then, the center and the top, what are they doing? They're trying to solve every problem later than earlier with worse information rather than better information. They're trying to solve all the problems. So there's a loss of simplicity. Now they have complexity because they're dealing with everything all at once. In the absence of autonomy, now they have to take on everything. And because things aren't being solved in parallel simultaneously, you've got autonomy, someone else has got autonomy, someone else has got it. That problems now, rather than being addressed simultaneously as they emerge, they become one by one, which then gets this compounding effect. So anyway, back to the limits on this. There may be a theoretical limit on how big we construct an organization, but we know that those limits are very, very large. In our book, Wiring the Winning Organization, we use several times NASA's great successes, manned missions to the moon, extraordinary results with probes and other kind of vehicles. And you start looking at the size of those triumphs, they were in the hundreds of thousands of people spread over the thousands of organizations. So maybe there's a limit outside of that, but we know hundreds of thousands of people is well within the limits. And again, why is that? It is because in all the examples in the book where we talk about restructuring in order to engage the ingenuity, the intellect, the creativity distributed across the organization, there's a lot of thought of taking advantage of doing so and getting the advantages of reduced latency, greater observability, greater simplicity, autonomy, and the ability to solve problems in parallel. So anyway, there may be limits, but there's somewhere far beyond 600,000 people spread across thousands of organizations.
Awesome. Great. Thank you for that explanation. Our second question is, how can leaders enable local problem solving without creating silos or misaligning the broader system?
Yeah, no, awesome question. So we've taken our work building off of the high velocity edge, which speaks a lot about the dynamics you need to have an organization competing on its intellectual horsepower. Um, and then in wiring, we speak more about the structures, like we were just talking about, taking problem solving and taking it from the top of the organization to the operating level and from the center out to the operating edge. So then the question is, what do leaders do? And the argument we're making, both in the books and then I'm trying to develop it further with Substack posts and that kind of thing, is leaders have really kind of three responsibilities, which typically aren't used in organizations which are top heavy, bureaucratic, command control, that kind of thing, administrative versus operational in focus, is one, constantly being aware of the wiring of the organization. Who's engaged with whom cross-functionally around what problems in what fashion, and noticing that when a problem is unresolved, that's not because of people's lack of effort, commitment, uh, individual capability, that there's something about the team which has been formed around that problem, which is, and we use this term for the double entendre, there's something incoherent about that team. And the reason we use this term coherence, incoherence, is that the double meaning of something that's coherent is something which is complete, dictionary definition. But also we typically use the term coherent to mean something which is predictable and reliable. And it turns out the two go together, right? Which is if we build something and it's got all the resources it needs, technical competency, other resources, decisional authority, if it's got all the things it needs, then it's complete and it can behave in a reliable, effective fashion. On the other hand, if it's incoherent, double entendre here, if it's incoherent and doesn't have all the things needed to address the situation, it's missing competencies, technical competencies, it's missing other resources, it's missing decisional authority, then it'll behave in a way that's non-reliable and non-predictable, incoherent. So anyway, what's the first job of a leader in a well-wired organization is actually look for bad wiring and deliberately monitor for problems which have emerged and aren't being addressed quickly and effectively, and saying the reason for that is because we have incoherence around that problem. We have incompleteness around that problem. What we need to do is get around that problem and make sure that we have the right combination of technical competency, other resources, and decisional authority. So that's one. A second key role for leaders in well-wired organizations is constantly monitoring the dynamics. Because it's one thing to say, oh, Mary, Steve, you get together and you have all the resources and competencies or authorities you need to solve that problem. All right, that's good. That's a static thing. But what's the dynamic thing of how well are we solving problems? Are we doing it with sufficient energy, sufficient rigor? Are we constantly going through this recursive kernel of declaring what we think is true and then quickly refuting what we think is true to figure out then, oh, we have to make a new declaration, right? And that's so characteristic of the best organizations. Their rigor and stringency about making declarations of what in the moment they think is true, and then also their immediate follow-up, high energy, trying to find out they're wrong, right? And that's the way they get to great understanding quickly. So anyway, what's the second requirement of leaders is one, they're constantly monitoring the wiring, the structure, to make sure that we have coherence around problems. Two, do we have the dynamics? That is the problem solving rigor and speed and energy, what it should be. That's the second. And what's the third? Which is they're constantly monitoring proximity to themselves are the people for whom they have direct responsibility, direct influence. Are those people doing exactly the same things? Worrying about the structure where they have responsibility, worrying about the dynamics there, and building the capability of other people. So three responsibilities. One is the structure. Do we have the right wiring, the right, coherent teams around problems? Two, within those teams, do they have really sound dynamics? And three, are we constantly building new and better capability so that we're always wired well and the wiring is working effectively?
You talked a little bit about what leaders need to do. So this next question is about their learning journey. So what would their learning journey be best to prepare them to recognize and correct organizational miswiring?
Yeah, Mary, that is, and just for anyone listening, that was not a setup question, but this notion of journey is something I've been working on the last couple of weeks, something we've been calling, quote unquote, the leader's journey. And that's a paraphrase. Joseph Campbell, for those who know, um, wrote a lot of stuff about myths, which go across different cultures, across different times. And he came up with this idea of the hero's journey. And the hero's journey, and plug here, you're going to see it if you want to go see the movie The Odyssey, right? Based on a hero's journey, is that a hero's journey has three pieces, if I remember correctly from Joseph Campbell. One is the leader is in a place and they leave. And then when they're out, they have a set of transformative experiences. And when they return home, they return home a changed person who deals with the circumstances at home in a much different fashion than they would have when they left. Anyway, I don't think that's a spoiler at all in the movie The Odyssey. We know it's a return. But anyway, seems to be a good movie. Got plans to see it next week. But anyway, back to the hero's journey. So we've rephrased that term, the leader's journey. So what is characteristic of folks who've transformed their organizations in some really profound ways? One is the first is a realization that where they are, this goes back to the gap conversation we started with. They realize that what their enterprise is actually delivering and what it needs to deliver is a huge gap. So there's a sense of discomfort that they have to leave, right? The leader's journey, the hero's journey, they have to leave. Second thing, they realize that the reason for the gap is operational, that somehow whatever resources they have, they're not putting together in a good enough fashion to get the most effect from what they already have. And let me just offer as an aside on that is that's actually a very good thing because when we say the resources we have are inadequate, the workforce, the supplier base, the materials, that all may be true, but what it does is it makes us helpless because it gives us away our agency. Because once we say there are all these things beyond my control, that might be sort of psychologically soothing because now I've I'm now devoid of responsibility for the situation, but also it should make us psychologically uncomfortable because I've given away any sense of power and agency and control. So part of the leader's journey is one, recognize the gap, and then two, say there's an agency involved here. This is an operational problem, not an administrative problem, and it's something that I can tend to rather than having to delegate it. Okay. So then that's the setup, that's the tension, and that's what gets the leader out the door. And then where does the leader go? And I was just writing up a whole series of cases from personal experience and learned experience, others' experience. What does the leader do? Go to the point of work. Go to the point of work and see what's actually going on. And in my writing, I've talked about this. I've used this phrase, quote unquote, model line. As an aside, sometimes that term gets misinterpreted as create the show pony, like the Epcot city of the future. It's not that. The model line is a training platform where a senior leader can go, make a direct observation of what's occurring, and have that moment of epiphany saying, now I see why we're underperforming, because the people at the point of work are under supported, that they don't have all the resources they need in order to succeed in the day. Mary, quick illustration on this. A bunch of years ago, we did work with DTE Energy, the big utility in Michigan, and they were underperforming on a bunch of things, but one was field service operations, that their ability to do support calls into residences, buildings in the field, digging up streets, their productivity was far less than it needed to be. The vice president, a guy named Harold Gardner, in charge of that unit, so he went to a service station called the Coolidge Service Station. And just imagine, this is a place where those trucks, those rigs leave every morning with technicians going out to do field service repairs. All right, so in terms of leader's journey, where's Harold? One, recognition, there's a gap. Two, recognizing the gap is operational, not administrative. There's no new policy or procedure or memo he can write. Then he's going to the point of work. All right, so that's part one. Then he's the point of work and he starts having the conversation with the people in the field about how they have to create this better dynamic of see a problem, solve a problem, all of that, stuff we talk about in the high velocity edge. Anyway, he's having all this conversation about see, and someone challenges him and says, "Hey, this might be an interesting idea for you, but you're talking about our livelihood. This is how we support our families. What are you going to do about that?" And wouldn't you know, Harold Gardner next day, he shows up and he puts on coveralls, and we're talking Detroit in the winter, and he rides a rig. And the reason he starts riding a rig is to see what the experience is looking over the shoulder of the technicians who are going out every day. And he's finding that when they show up in the morning, they can't start the engines on their diesel-powered rigs. Why? Because it's cold in Detroit in the winter, but they don't have sufficient block heaters. Even if they have sufficient block heaters, irony, it's as a utility, they don't have sufficient power supply to the block heaters to heat up the engines. Even if they can start the rigs, some rigs don't have all the parts and equipment they need. Some of the rigs even if they have that, they don't have the necessary technical instruction. So when they show up, they're not intellectually, mentally prepared for the situation. They're sort of like figuring it out on the fly. Anyway, Harold's initial realization on this is that one, there is a symptom of productivity, but there's no solution. It's lots and lots of little things that are contributing. And he, having the authorities he has, can help people, give people permission to call out those little micro problems, the block heaters, the power source, the provision of kits and parts onto rigs, technical instruction, that he can give people permission to raise their hand, amplify, see a problem and call it out, and get that problem solved. And so that's the part two of the leader's journey for Harold Gardner, which is he's left and now he's out in the field and he's having this transformation of understanding why the organization is not performing as well as it should. So then what's the part three of the leader's journey? So for Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey is he comes home changed by being out and behaves differently. So what does Harold Gardner do? What he realizes is that there are many, many operational problems around the enterprise. The way to address them is operationally to go to a problem and recognize, back to our earlier part of our conversation, that we don't have coherence around the problem. We don't have people with all the necessary cross-functional competency, all the necessary cross-functional decisional authority, all the other necessary resources. So what does he do? He gives permission, he empowers a team to be the champions on the creation of these cross-functional problem-solving teams. And that's part three of his journey. He realizes that the way we're going to get better at DTE Energy, and not just him, but all the senior leadership, realize the way we get better is that we do this all the time, everywhere. So anyway, what are the results of that leader's journey? Having left, having been transformed, having come back and saying, oh, there's a way to deal with closing the gap. So what are the results? So the productivity of those field service crews goes up by more than 50%. The exact number I think is closer to 60, but I'll be conservative because I don't have it right in front of me. They carry this over to other parts of the business. Heavy duty maintenance on transformers. That goes from a weeks long effort down to days long. And you start thinking about that and you start multiplying weeks down to days. That's basically getting free transformers back to the utility. They get more efficient on just power generation. You start thinking about how long human beings have been burning hydrocarbons to convert them to steam to drive turbines. And for all of that accumulated wisdom, they realized, wow, if we can start doing this everywhere, they got more efficient on that. They generated hundreds of millions of dollars in recurring, or yeah, more than $100 million in recurring annual savings. And why? Because Harold Gardner and his fellow senior leaders had this journey of one, recognize that they had to leave where they were and go out. When they went out open-minded to have an experience that changed them. And when they came back changed, they acted differently upon their return. So anyway, and with that, just think about every time you watch an Odysseus, think about Harold Gardner at DTE, a buddy of mine named Gotti DeVere at Intel, another guy named Rob at a different part of Intel. Every time you see these profound changes in outcome, it's because some leader chose to take this journey, come back a transformed person, and then act on that transformation in very, very positive ways for all stakeholders.
So let's change topics just a little bit. So, are the four rules in use still relevant? Second part of the question would be, and how should the four rules in use adapt for autonomous AI agents?
Yeah. So, Mary, thank you. So, first of all, I appreciate you bringing up the four rules in use. And for those who are familiar with my work, it's most familiar by the article in which those appeared. That's that 1999 article in Harvard Business Review called Decoding the DNA of the Toyota Production System. And I'm delighted people still bring that up. I meet people every now and again and say, oh, I read your article like last year when it was assigned in a course. So, product placement here, folks. I've written since then. And I have proof of it because the Shingo people keep inviting me back. All right. So I'm just run the string. So decoding the DNA of the Toyota production system, we start with the paradox in there. On the one hand, you've got a Toyota with this incredible commitment to quote unquote standards, which most people think is be a source of rigidity. On the other hand, even back in 1999, Toyota was demonstrating far more agility than anyone else in the sector. How do you reconcile that? And I went in and did my research as a graduate student embedded on a Toyota team, thinking like a lot of other people did, that there must be some secret tool here. That we've got the Kanban cards, we've got the just-in-time, the end-on cords, the 5S, standard work, this thing, that thing, the Heijunka. There must be another tool. And what I came to appreciate inside Toyota was that they were using standards differently than most people expected. Most people expected standards were being used for control. Toyota was using standards, one, in the moment as the best known approach to succeed. And because of the tremendous clarity of a standard, it provided the ability to see problems immediately at the time and place of the occurrence. And another line we put in is that on the one hand, there's this paradox. Standards, which one would assume are a source of rigidity, but we have agility instead. Why is the source of that? And we said, because Toyota's not using standards for control. They're using standards, quote unquote, to create a community of scientists. To your point about distributed autonomy, that what Toyota had done was create conditions in which everyone could see problems and solve problems. So anyway, tying this back to the rules in use. So in that article, we talk about three rules, basically, which are how to design systems so problems are evident. And the fourth rule was how to solve problems when you see them. And there's a key phrase in that rule, which is solve problems with rigor in the smallest possible group. All right. So this now, Mary, just foreshadowing to how the work advanced. The smallest possible group. What does that mean? It's a deliberate attempt to make sure that we have as few people as possible, but still equipped, coherent with all the resources, the competencies, and the authorities they need. And so this starts driving to that leadership responsibility of structure, which is if we're trying to solve problems in the smallest possible group, and there's lots of advantages for doing so, then we always have to worry about, do we have the right people talking to the right other people in the right way at the right time and place? But anyway, carrying forward to your question, the rules in use, absolutely positively relevant. So, but anyway, let's think about what we added over time. So this energetic dynamic of seeing and solving problems. So that carries over to the high velocity edge, which is a book largely about binet dynamics. But how do we expand on that? So we say capability one, we took the first three rules in use and said, all right, these pile all onto how do you design systems so you can see problems. And then rules in use number four became capability number two. I know the mapping gets a little complicated, but we say, well, there's a whole set of how you design systems so problems are evident. It becomes capability one, and that's the bulk of rules in use. Then there's how do you behave when you see a problem? So that becomes the last of the rules in use. But what we added in high velocity edge is like, wait a second, there's another piece here. When you've seen a problem and you've solved the problem, what do you do with that information? That becomes capability three, which is the sharing, which is you take what's the local discovery and make it systemic. And then we say, and all of this stuff about seeing and solving and sharing is not something that happens naturally. And so it becomes a leadership responsibility. And in the rules and use article, I don't think we spoke so explicitly about the role of leaders in cultivating this behavior. So the high velocity edge, the fourth capability, is very profoundly focused on how leaders behave differently in these high velocity learning organizations than they do elsewhere. So anyway, just one step forward, because what's the latest published work is this Wiring the Winning Organization. In that, we agree with everything about the dynamics. And so we talk about this mechanism amplification. What is that? Make sure you see problems early and often. Then we talk about the second mechanism called slowification. What is that? It's like if you see a problem, hit the pause button. Not easy to do sometimes. Hit the pause button, and so that you can actually solve the problem and then share what you've discovered, right? So that's capability two and three. And then the last one is what we call simplification. And this is where we finally start making the transition from dynamics into structure, which is how do you actually design systems so it's easy to see problems, amplify. And when you see problems, what should be one of your design objectives or corrective action objectives is simplify the system so it's easier to design, operate, and improve. So anyway, that's sort of the string, Mary, from, so yes, rules in use still apply. It's just not that we've contradicted them, we've absorbed them as we come to a more, I wouldn't say comprehensive, but complete. I'd say coherent, right? Using that term again. As we've come to a more complete theory of success and what leadership looks like in successful organizations, the rules in use have now been absorbed into this more coherent explanation of leadership and success.
I have one last question. It may be the hardest question of them all. Which process changes have the greatest impact on culture?
Yeah, so Mary, let's tie this back to the leader's journey and which process change. It gets back to why are the winners winning? Because they're taking advantage of the the intelligence distributed in the hearts and minds of the people in the organization. That's how they're winning. And truthfully, we didn't talk a lot about AI, but if we start thinking about AI as a way to augment human intelligence, not replace it, and let's just take that as an aside real quick, and then we'll come back to the most important process change. I just want to be clear about this. AI is like freaking incredible, right? But so were steam engines. What did a steam engine do? It allowed a person who had intent, and intent always goes with the hearts and minds, who had intent, and it gave them a way to express that intent more effectively, more productively, more efficiently than they could just using their own personal brawn. That's what a steam engine did. And it gave us a way to harness the energy of the natural world and direct it in a way that we wanted to. And AI, in some regards, is the same thing. It doesn't replace human intelligence because it worked completely different. What's the power of AI? One, we take advantage of the memory, the ability of computers to memorize a ton of stuff, which we can't. And then when it memorizes a ton of stuff, find structure and relationships in that statistically. It's all math, right? Which we can't as ourselves. So, for example, you can load not the few documents you read as a human being, but hundreds, if not thousands, and then ask the machine to dig into that. So it can do that. But what can the machine not do? The machine can't infer. The machine depends on being in a very digitized, data-dense place to be comfortable. But where a human being is comfortable, we're okay where it's not digitized. Things are tacit, they're idiosyncratic, they're local, and the data is not dense. That's where we form hypotheses. That's where we form expectations. That's where we can run experiments. So anyway, just as an aside, where does AI come in this? It does things for us that we can't do for ourselves, just like a steam engine can do things for us that we can't do for ourselves. It doesn't replace us. All right, now back to the single process change. Um, we have to think about this that we're competing. Toyota's competing. DT Energy was competing. The various huge successes in Intel, NVIDIA now, how are they competing on harnessing and taking advantage of the intelligence distributed through the organization? So what's the very first process change that matters? It's the start of the leader's journey. The leader leaving and going out. And literally or metaphorically, like Harold Gardner did at DTE, putting on the coveralls, getting on the rig, and seeing what's impeding people and giving fullest expression to their ingenuity, their creativity, their desire to solve problems in a way that the solutions they generate are valuable to somebody else. That's the biggest process change. We're doing this in shipyards now. I'm doing support of a shipyard that does major maintenance and modernization on attack submarines. And 2 years ago, when they had projects, everything would be rebaselined, quote unquote, to the right. We're going to be late. We're going to be late. It was just assumed. If you do that work, it's complex. 500,000 labor days of work, 50,000 individual jobs. It's going to be late. This year, the commanding officer of that shipyard, a guy, Captain Jesse Nice, he came out in March and said, "Hey, we're rebaselining everything to the left. We're going to be on time or early with everything." And out of one of their sites where they do maintenance and modernization, I think they're up over a dozen in a row, early or on time. And what was the first process change there? It wasn't technological. It wasn't administrative. It wasn't financial. It was the senior leaders of that organization, Captain Nice and his predecessor, a guy named Mike Oberdorf, the senior civilian, a guy named Steve Fahey. Step one of the leader's journey, getting out of the office, out of the building, going to the point of work and looking over the shoulder of the machinists, mechanics, technicians, frontline engineers, and looking and trying to understand what is it about the system for which we as leaders have responsibility? What is it about the systems which is compromising your best efforts to do something valuable for somebody else? And then taking that and saying, we're going to now accept this responsibility and go back and start changing things locally. And then realizing, this is part 3 of the journey, coming back from that initial step out, transformed, and saying, and this is how we're going to run our enterprise. This is what leaders do. And just as an example on that, so what do leaders now do in that shipyard? There's a term in the military, TDY, temporary duty. All right. And temporary duty normally means like, oh, I'm located here in Kittery, Maine, so I have temporary duty down to Groton, Connecticut. Or I'm here in Maine and I have temporary duty to a satellite site at Point Loma in San Diego. You know what they've been doing with temporary duty? Senior leaders, like a guy named Dave Simino, temporary duty, and he goes out onto a boat, which is being repaired, as an apprentice pipe fitter. That's his temporary duty. And for a week, Dave Simino is doing nothing but crawling in through all the pipes and all the plumbing and all the wiring with all the other pipe fitters as an apprentice, and just being there to understand what the experience of a pipe fitter is on board one of the ships, and then coming back and going like, I had no flipping idea. I had no flipping idea. So Mary, what's the first process change? It's the change in leadership behavior, and it's that first step in the leader's journey of getting out to have that transformation.
That's amazing. And I absolutely agree with you. Steve, thank you so much. It's been so wonderful to talk to you today. To all of our listeners, make sure you go out and buy the book. You can find it on shingo.org/books. We would love to have you read it and share your thoughts with Steve. I'm sure he would love to have that feedback. So
Yeah. And Mary, on the theme of the only way you get better is put something out there and find how it's wrong, write it down and then refute it. So I recently took to Substack, because apparently that's where everyone is now. And so if people find me on Substack, I've just started doing this post. But that said, would love to have people find me on Substack and tell me what's wrong, because that's the only way I'm going to get any smarter is, again, the Substack is exactly a great place to write it down so someone else can refute it. So I'm writing, you refute.
I love it. I love it. All right. Well, thank you again, and we'll see you next time.
Fantastic. Mary, thank you for this and the years and years of really productive relationship with the Shingo community. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Steve.